Okay, that's it for today. Stay tuned for next time where...
Whoa, 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 whoa. I was promised a collab. I want a full collab.
Whoa, what do you have in mind?
I got it.
Court is in session.
Hear ye, Honorable Judge Silly Eyes presiding, and will oversee the case of The People versus The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker. Taking the role of prosecutor, Mr. Kilometer's Side Value.
Heyo.
And taking the role of defense attorney, Mr. Psylocke's Wrong.
Nah.
Is the defense ready? Would the defense please present their opening statement?
You're a bully.
Fair enough. Is the prosecution ready?
What was that?
I said, are you ready?
What was that?
I said, are you ready?
What was that?
I said, are you ready?
What?
I said, are you ready?
Your Honor, the prosecution was born ready!
Would the prosecution please present their opening statement?
Oh. I didn't know there was going to be a test. Oh. I didn't study.
Would the prosecution please present their opening statement?
Why are you interrogating me?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker review.
Now, we're going to be doing something a little bit different today. Last time we worked together, we reviewed and debated whether or not The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask was the worst 3D Zelda game, which you believe to be true and I believe to be false, so I played Devil's Advocate, which everybody's seen. Right, viewer?
But this time, the roles are going to be reversed. I'm going to be playing the Devil's Advocate for what you believe to be the worst 3D Zelda. Of course, that game being...
The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker. When it was released, you were labeled as some sort of man-child for daring to say anything positive about it, most of which was directed at the upbeat presentation and colorful graphics, because, as we all know, if you aren't playing a game where you're not scraping the remnants of a suicide bomber and his family off your cool sunglasses in the middle of a bombed-out Middle Eastern city every 5 minutes, you must not possess a scrotum.
In 2013, The Wind Waker was remastered for the Wii U, and it was this version that exposed the game to folks who either didn't play it before or re-exposed it to people who didn't care for it to begin with. The perception was far more positive from that point forward, with many players really getting into the story and world of The Wind Waker. This game has still got absolutely nothing on A Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask in terms of love, but it is there. Although recently, many reviews of The Wind Waker have offered a more negative take on it, often citing the lackluster dungeons as the main reason for that.
Speaking personally, I played Wind Waker back in early 2014, only a few months after I played Ocarina of Time for the first time, which, if you're keeping up, was the catalyst for me becoming a Zelda fan, so having come into Wind Waker with sky-high hopes, it couldn't have ever truly reached my expectations. In the end, I took it for what it was and didn't really mind it, though I had a friend who had just gotten into the series around the same time and he thought Wind Waker was fantastic, but as time went on and the more I thought about it, the more I realized how frustrated I was with Wind Waker while I was playing it and how conflicted I was about it. But one thing's for sure, I had zero desire to play it from that point forward. How about you, Jay?
The Wind Waker was a game that I was always interested in playing. I mean, with these graphics, who wouldn't be? Although the game that got me into the Zelda series was Ocarina 3D, I was still intent on getting my hands on the Wind Waker once the Wii U version hit, and I picked it up. I did beat it shortly after, and I thought it was a pretty good game that wasn't as strong as Ocarina 3D, but still offered a lot of fun regardless. It wasn't until a few months later when I played it again, and I fell in love with the game in all of its aspects. Since then, I have played it maybe once or twice, but this review is definitely my first time in a long while. After having played it twice, how do I feel?
So as we start up, the obligatory Zelda title screen comes up with the camera pan over the island. It doesn't show as much personality as previous Zelda games, but it goes to establish a more laid-back tone with calming shots of various parts of the island and Link standing on a cliff top relaxing, but also looking onward onto the ocean, perhaps longingly, as if to give a prelude to the adventure that's about to happen.
It's a good opening, all things considered, especially the music. I still feel that both the N64 intros have done a superior job in regards to setting up the game. But anyway, this game opens with an interestingly eerie series of texts as we find out that long ago, Hyrule was saved by Link in Ocarina of Time, but one day he suddenly vanished. This is implied to be the moment when Zelda sent Link back to the Child Era, thus beginning the Child timeline, which means that this game follows the timeline in the future that Zelda stayed in at the end of Ocarina of Time. Eventually, Ganon returned from his seal, and without Link to save the day, Hyrule was basically fucked. In typical Hyrule fashion, they begged the gods for help, and they basically told them, climb to the top of the mountains as we know as Arctic. In all seriousness, the gods flooded Hyrule in an attempt to free the people from Ganon and protect the Triforce. I like how ominous the drawings are of Ganon in this scene, although it could be bothersome how this is unskippable in the GameCube version, but luckily the Wii U version remedied that.
I agree, it's an eerie opening to the plot and a real showcase of the power we're up against in Ganon. It really set the table for a really nice meal. Now, as for the game, it takes place several millennia after the Great Floods with our titular protagonist Link, or in my case, you dick, I like my dialogue to sound like Link's being insulted everywhere he goes, from the outset Island that is. Wind Waker starts as it means to go on, with Link waking up and looking like he's one color correction from being baked before having to traipse across the island to Grandma's house before going all the way back to where you started. Definitely a sign of things to come. That being said, while I believe this to be the worst 3D Zelda game, I still think it's a solid game for the most part. What it does really well, it does really well, and when it gets down and dirty as a proper Zelda game, it's arguably the best. It's just when it shits the bed, it really shits the bed.
The first and most immediate positive that this game has going for it is the art direction. The Wind Waker pioneered the concept of cell shading. It existed in other games like Jet Set Radio or Sly Cooper, which was released the previous year, but Wind Waker was the game that made it popular. Kinda like how Shenmue invented QuickTime events, but God of War made it popular. Cell shading is a type of 3D rendering that makes a 3D model appear 2D by using flat gradients rather than progressional shading.
Whoa, slow down on the tech talk, Mike.
I will now pointlessly talk about dithering for 5 minutes.
Okay, enough in-jokes. Truth be told, I really do like the cell shading. It's something that should be used sparingly and something that should not be used for the sake of itself. By its very nature, it's meant for a more exaggerated, colorful aesthetic to take full advantage of it, and the last thing cell shading should be used on is a realistically proportionate character. I think the worst example of this is the game Cassie, because it just felt like they slapped it on there to try and make it look unique, but ultimately looks aesthetically confused and a bit visually inconsistent. It's something you need to go all the way with, otherwise it just looks all over the place.
Wind Waker definitely goes far enough to take full advantage of the aesthetic. Most characters look vaguely like a hyper-exaggerated bobblehead, and even the characters who don't look just cartoony enough to look in place. Seeing as I've already discussed the cell shading, let's get the presentation out of the way. Wind Waker on the GameCube runs at a 480p resolution, which was common on the GameCube. This means that I get to make the most out of my GameCube playthrough with the ex-RGB Framemeister. Poor TGX, he's just left with his naked component cables. Truly more tragic than Link's goodbye to his grandmother.
Yeah, because pixel-perfect quality is worth spending $200 on. Excuse me while I drink myself to death in shame.
That would be $300, Mr. Kaizo Bolio. The Wind Waker has such a simplistic look, it truly is quite charming and easy on the eyes, with a solid blue ocean, light blue skies, which contrast quite nicely with the various greens that Link wears. One thing you may notice is that when sailing, the boat often clips through the water, which does actually happen in real-life boats, but I'm going to guess this was merely a technical failing. Get this though, the Wii U version actually fixes this, but once you unlock the Swift Sail, it just happens again.
Yeah, that probably just had to do with the system. If they had the foresight to make a splashing animation when you clipped into the water, that would have been nice, but maybe that just didn't come up. Personally, I love the way this game looks. It's bright and cheerful without being over the top. The environments are appealingly saturated. The detail is lacking a bit, obviously, because this is a 2003 era GameCube game, but the art style covers that up somewhat because the cell shading allows for slight blurring in the environments to fit. Otherwise, the character designs are really nice. Something I discovered while playing Wrath of Cortex recently is that one thing you can't skimp out on when it comes to detail are the things you're looking at the most overall. In this case, the main characters, and that's something Wind Waker got right. The character models, and especially the main characters, all look great, and with the art style are able to convey so much emotion. This is the most animated any Zelda characters, especially Link, have ever been. The game looks great all around. The environment, characters, colors, etc. This game holds up better graphically than arguably any game of the generation. Of course, the Wii U version looks stunning with much higher quality textures, lighting, environments, and more.
There has been a bit of divide in the fan base about whether or not Wind Waker HD is a graphical improvement, since some folks have expressed disappointment with the more dynamic lighting and bloom effects, which were reduced from E3. I am mixed. I do think the Wind Waker on the GameCube stands out more, but the Wii U version plays so much better that I really didn't mind.
I thought there really wasn't much you could do to graphically improve Wind Waker because of the art style, but I thought they did a good job for what it's worth. It's not like N64 versus 3DS, it's more of style versus quality, so there's no real definitive answer which looks better. It's just down to what you prefer. I guess I'm partial to the GameCube version, if only because the frame rate was oddly more stable. There were some odd drops on the remaster. Not many, but they were there and they were noticeable.
In addition, I never noticed this before, but there was also more pop-up in the HD version. On the GameCube, everything was a flat 2D texture with a silhouette that faded in as you got closer, but not really on the HD port. Beyond that, I think that covers the graphics, wouldn't you say?
I'd say so. Unless you want to talk about mip mapping and artifacting.
No, stop.
Fine then. So the story goes that when boys reach a certain age on this island, the age being undisclosed to the player, they don the hero's garb, the outfit of the hero of time, for them to know the courage of the one who struck down evil in hopes that they might too become heroes, or some mumbo-jumbo like that. On the day our protagonist inherited the hero's clothes, a mysterious bird flew over the island, dropping a pirate who we later find out is named Tetra. Once you save her, said bird kidnaps your sister, and you're forced to leave your quiet life behind and go with the pirates to save your sister.
From there, Link infiltrates the Forsaken Fortress, and despite finding his sister as well as several other girls we can talk about later, he's captured by the bird, and Ganon orders him to be tossed away. Now this will make the second time that Ganon will have wished he killed Link when he had the chance. This scene serves as a setup for your rivalry with Ganondorf, since it's a mystery as to what he's up to on these seas. You end up on Windfall Island where you meet your companion, the King of Red Lions, and he instructs you to get a sail for him.
Windfall has a diverse set of characters and a few activities to do, including playing hide and seek with this gang of kids called the Killer Bees. Once that's done, their leader Tony will—
Hold up, what is that name again?
Tony?
And the name of the gang?
The Killer Bees?
How old did you say they were
I
again?
don't know, around 10 or 11?
So you'd say they're around playground age, eh?
What are you on about?
Come on, this couldn't have been a coincidence. Goddamn sucker punch. Tony the Killer Bee.
Who?
Come on, that
Everyone's heard of Tony the Killer Bee. You're the terror of every player grounder from here to Sicily.
I don't know what you're talking about, never playing the spy pooper games.
Wow, you really are an idiot.
Yes, anyhow, you can just free Tingle and buy the sail, but this side quest with the Killer Bees and the Joy Pendants is needed for later.
Link goes to Dragon Roost Island and is unceremoniously given the Wind Waker.
Actually, can I just stop you there for a second? For me, this is the most insulting part of the game. The biggest insult was the major MacGuffin this game is built around, the Wind Waker itself, and how unceremoniously it's given to you. But first, what did you think of the scene from Ocarina of Time where Link acquires the titular Ocarina?
It was a good scene, and one of the better cutscenes in Ocarina.
Yeah, personally, I'd go further than that. It might just be one of my favorite sequences in gaming. The sudden rush of having to face one's fears, the first confrontation with Ganondorf of which Link is not prepared for whatsoever, the general atmosphere with the storm and the music, Zelda being forced to flee, only just barely being able to get the message to Link, and when it's all over, the sense of crushing loneliness as you stand in that field, as if everything you've worked for is gone and the only thing left to do is carry out Zelda's wishes as you go to grab the Ocarina. It's a superb bit of storytelling. You'd expect something similar in scale to introduce the Wind Waker, this game's equivalent, but instead what happens is that, literally apropos of nothing, the King of Red Lions just gives you the Wind Waker when the plot demands it. There's no build, no payoff, it just happens randomly when they realize, oh shit, they need to be able to change the wind now, and it goes down like a wet fart. Hey, here's this all-powerful weather-changing device that I didn't mention until now because reasons.
So anyway, Link interacts with the Rito people, most importantly being Medley, and after he saves the day, he's given Din's Pearl and needs to gather the other two. The second is given in the Forest Haven, where Link meets the new Great Deku Tree from Ocarina of Time.
Oh my god, what did they do to Captain Quark?
And Makara, member of the Koroks, an evolution of the Kokiri. With the third just being handed to us. Once all three are in hand, Link is taken below the water to Hyrule Castle where he gets the Master Sword. Then you make your way back to the Forsaken Fortress, rescue your sister and the other girls, and finally with the Master Sword in hand, meet face to face with Ganondorf.
And you promptly get your ass handed to you. You narrowly make it out after Ganondorf discovers Tetra is the descendant of the Princess Zelda and as such possesses the Triforce of Wisdom. The fortress gets blown to shit and you make it back to the Tower of the Gods, then Hyrule proper where everything is explained to Link and Tetra, who then transforms into a very absurd dress. She then spends the rest of the game locked away while Link goes to awaken the two sages needed to power up the Master Sword. These two sages, it turns out, are the previously established characters Medley and Makar.
Hold on, I'm just gonna stop there and say, guys, I love the story in Wind Waker, but goddamn, Zelda is really bad in this game. I thought Tetra was very interesting, with an intriguing backstory and a likably dickish personality. However, once the Zelda transformation happens, all personality is instantaneously lost, as well as her having to look the part of the princess, I guess. I don't get this scene whatsoever. Also, it was incredibly contrived how the King of Red Lions just decides she needs to stay in Hyrule for her safety when she's been sailing the Seven Seas for her whole life. And of course, this is how Ganon takes her hostage. I don't know, I feel as if she would have been a great aid during these dungeons, especially seeing as they're already partner dungeons as is.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up too. Why is it that in every game they make Zelda have any level of personality? There's a point where it all goes completely out the window. It happened in this, Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, you name it.
Once power is restored to the Master Sword, Link can set out for Ganon's Tower, which is conveniently across the street from Hyrule Castle.
Makes me wonder how there was ever peace to begin with. As for the proper ending, we'll talk about that more in depth later, but suffice it to say, you face Ganondorf, the King of Red Lions uses the Triforce to flood Hyrule, you defeat Ganondorf, and sail into the unknown with Tetra and her crew. Overall, this is one of the best stories in the series. It's not necessarily sophisticated, but it's at least nuanced. On the surface, it seems ordinary, but it's the personality that really brings out the color of this world. Everything, the world, these characters, they're all just oozing with unique and interesting personality.
Link himself is one of the most interesting versions of the character we've ever seen. My issue with Link being a blank slate in the last two games has finally been resolved with a wide variety of facial animations and emotions. Link can't speak, but visually he conveys all the emotions we need for him to be relatable. Like when he raises the hero's clothes in disgust, or how he smiles during the Korok performance, or the famous goodbye wave to the grandmother in the opening. There are so many examples to pick from that's not even funny. And speaking of funny, this is the first Link that manages to pull off that as well, like the equally famous scene in the canon.
One thing that immediately sticks out to me is that, and Majora's Mask did this as well, this is a plot refreshingly not about destiny. The problem with so many Zelda plots is that the whole predestined hero thing is such a boring and overused trope that I just roll my eyes at the concept. Twilight Princess was especially egregious for this because the hero's clothes that were a source of weary contention for Wind Waker Link was given to Twilight Princess Link as a literal god-given gift to signify his status as the hero of destiny. Wind Waker starts out simply as you trying to save your sister. It's the type of plot that starts on the straight and narrow with one specific goal, but by the time you complete that goal, the scope of the plot has widened to the point that in this case, Link decides to become the hero and eventually saves the day. I find predestined heroism to be boring, and the type of hero who stumbles into the role by various means much more interesting, and it's something that Wind Waker definitely got right.
There are many inhabitants in Wind Waker, many of which are very memorable by their designs alone, like the Joy Pendant teacher, the butler on the private island whose front side is on the front of the door and his back is on the opposite side, or the sketchy looking auction guy, the snot-nosed kid on Outset Island, and so on. In regards to memorable stories, one of my favorites is on Windfall Island. Since Ganon has been capturing girls all over the world, two of them came from Windfall Island, the daughter of this rich man and one of the poor homeless man.
Oh, that's what that guy's story was. I never bothered to listen to that guy. Any character you're forced to talk to if you walk by is ignored by me, mostly out of spite.
When the pirates rescued them in the middle of the game, the rich man paid all he had to get his daughter back, and thus was put on the street. The homeless girl had collected enough trinkets in the Forsaken Fortress to become rich, and they bought out the previous rich family. The now rich girl has developed a bit of Stockholm Syndrome for her former prison guard and now demands you send letters to him. On the flip side, the now poor girl has to work for a living, but even tries to steal money from her boss, and you talk her out of following that path as she gives you an empty bottle for it. We can talk more about it at the end of the video, but stories like these give this game a positive vibe to it, and that's why I love Wind Waker.
That is an interesting point. The world building in Wind Waker seems to be much stronger than anything we've seen thus far aside from Majora's Mask, with all of these societies just living their daily lives with you fixing whatever problem that ails them. It's like the best of Majora's Mask with a much more linear plot. It's a plot that you're heavily involved with, but it's not insultingly revolving around you, unlike something like Majora's Mask that goes in a completely different direction from established convention, or something like Twilight Princess that follows established convention like a creepy stalker. Wind Waker finds a happy middle ground and benefits from the best of both worlds. So you have subversion with things like a plot not revolving around saving the world at first, an interesting protagonist filled with personality in every little thing he does, and a Zelda with a sassy personality, but you also have the traditional strong antagonist of Ganondorf and an engaging plot based around the Triforce. I think this is a fantastic story top to bottom, in simple albeit important ways. If I were to give a one-word summary of this game's story, it would be charming. I do have my problems, but those more so tie into some of the other issues we'll get to in a bit. Now, how about that soundtrack?
As someone who played the Wii U version first, it was instantly noticeable how the GameCube version has this weird effect on it. I don't know how to describe it really. The Wii U version did remove this in favor of clear audio, which is good. As a whole, the soundtrack is very memorable, with several classics in the series like The Great Sea, Windfall Island, Outset Island, Dragon Roost Island, and my personal favorite, the final boss fight, which perfectly captures the atmosphere and intensity. The soundtrack is definitely a joy to listen to all around, like the ambient noise of the Earth Temple or the upbeat boss fight with Mulgara.
I can agree with that. I think a good word to use would be jaunty. It's a nice and upbeat soundtrack to match the overall feeling of the game. You mentioned the big heavy hitters, but I think the real standout is the main theme, which is just a pleasant sounding piece with a great melody and tone. And the sailing music.
The Great Sea, Great Sea, Great Sea, Great Sea, Great Sea.
Go! It gives you a sense of grand adventure and exploration that comes with sailing. It's such a fun, epic sounding piece. Or as some idiot might hypothetically say, funny story, in junior year, my gym class went on a sailing field trip, and as soon as we hit the open waters, me and my sailing partner, who was a fan of Wind Waker, just started blurting out this piece loud enough for everyone to hear. We didn't care because we were having fun, and that's what this soundtrack is. Fun.
Well, so far, it seems like you're pretty positive on this game, so why is it your least favorite 3D Zelda?
Well, we've only just gotten to the big issue, the gameplay.
Starting with the Wind Waker, it became abundantly clear that 3D Zelda games were going to follow the mold of Ocarina when it comes to mechanics. If you've played Ocarina or Majora or seen our videos on said games, the Wind Waker shouldn't be hard to grasp. You know A is a contact-sensitive button, B is attack, yada yada yada. The controls in Wind Waker are a lot smoother at the same time, with the improved analog stick as well as full camera control, since this game utilized the second analog stick to a great extent.
That is a definite plus of Wind Waker, where Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask felt like they were held together with duct tape and string at times, which made sense because they were still getting to grips with the control system and 3D. This game feels more refined and deliberate in terms of controls and mechanics.
So now let's discuss how the items work. Both versions of the Wind Waker give you 3 item buttons, but with the little convenience added, it feels like night and day. In the GameCube version, you had to waste item slots with things like the Wind Waker itself, the ship sail in order to sail, or the grappling hook in the ship if you want to salvage items, or bombs in the ship to use them. This is the kind of thing that takes time to sift through menus in order to get.
I've heard this described as the click-to-action ratio, and menu faff should not dominate your time in a game to any significant degree, so surprisingly, Wind Waker HD is one of the few times where a Wii U game actually benefits from the gamepad as opposed to feeling like an over-elaborate gimmick. Otherwise, the menu navigation can become a bit of a chore in the GameCube version.
The Wind Waker HD allows you to use the gamepad to quickly switch items without a hassle. So now you can maximize usage out of all 3 item buttons, since the Wind Waker and all of the ship functions are mapped to other buttons. Thank God. The gamepad can also be used as a map when sailing or in dungeons, which helps you keep in the action at all times.
As for the combat mechanics, it doesn't do anything wildly new, but it does everything right for the most part, so it's relegated to the sword fighting mostly, although the items you can get throughout the game can also be used to various effects in combat. Things like the bombs and arrows have their obvious usage, but then you have things like the grappling hook that can be used to steal items from enemies, though the game obviously doesn't tell you these things, giving you a bit of room for experimentation. On a whole, the combat is much more satisfying on a base level than its predecessors. I think the N64 games, as good as they were, it could sometimes feel like you were just 2 character models slashing swords in vaguely the same direction, making you feel more like marionettes than fighters, but a real effort has been put forth in Wind Waker to ensure that the fights seem legit and the blows land with the same impact you'd expect from sword fighting, and that effort really shows. The sword fighting feels much more crisp and real, with all of your blows connecting with a sickening thud.
The combat in the Wind Waker is easily one of my favorite things in this game. Between this, Twilight Princess, and Breath of the Wild, I have a hard time picking a favorite. When it comes to mechanics, it works the same way. L-targeting is the same as previous games, as are the kinds of combos you can unleash. What is new is the parry system. If timed correctly, Link will either roll around or jump above his foes, and an insanely satisfying slash does a large sum of damage. There's also a lot more pizzazz in the basic combo, with such great color choices when swinging your sword. One of the things that makes combat so pleasurable is the sound design. Every hit from the sword will play a sound cue, and when strung together you'll hear a series of sounds that just makes every hit feel like it packs a punch. Another interesting gameplay mechanic is how you can steal enemy weapons and use them in combat. This isn't a part of the gameplay like Breath of the Wild, but I do think it adds some nice visual variety as you can toy with different options. In addition, I noticed that in the GameCube version, enemies seem to be blocking my Master Sword strikes, and only when I managed to get my hands on their weapons was the moment of victory. The part in Hyrule Castle is one of my favorites in the game. Story-wise, you see how decrepit it's been for ages, which really paints a picture of how brutal the attack was. But once you restore time, we get it for gameplay reasons, where you have to fight the onslaught of enemies, and this is one of my favorites in the game, like I just said, for all the discussed reasons on why combat is so fantastic.
That's a point I can dig like a shallow grave. Now, with all that said and done, again? What the fuck? Let's talk about the progression of the Great Sea. So this is so god-for-bullying, ridiculously, bullifyingly badly implemented. Why the hell did you give me these lines? Let's talk about the thing that is surely to many people the elephant in the room when it comes to Wind Waker, the sailing. This is kind of the sticking point for a lot of people as to whether or not this is one of the best or one of the worst Zelda games. Personally, I'm conflicted on the matter. I both love and hate it. On one hand, it makes the world of Wind Waker feel vast and epic. I like the idea of traversing a sprawling world on your way to a destination. It makes you feel more connected to the world and helps with immersion. It's like driving to work and seeing all these places you've become increasingly familiar with as time has gone on. The problem with the sailing, I find, however, is that there's just nothing to it. The lion's share of your time playing Wind Waker is spent looking at featureless blue ocean. It's a fun concept at first, but then it loses its novelty very quickly and just turns into a pointless commute, and it's just boring. Even in the HD remake with the Swift Sail, you still have to manually travel everywhere. The only difference is that you have a better top speed, which is always maintained, so you don't have to do the YMCA every time you need to make a turn, but you're still spending your time staring into blue nothing where you can set your controller down and not miss a thing. And if I'm playing a game and have to entertain myself through other means while playing, something's fucked up. Manual traversal through large spaces does carry its own benefits, like finding new and interesting things as you go. You can find and discover new islands on the way to your destination. Keyword there is can, but why would you want to? What is there to discover? Pretty much nothing, because any island you find is either a place you can't access, won't become relevant until later, or at best is a fairy fountain that you're done with in 2 minutes. So there's just nothing to really discover that actually benefits you or is even worth your time. The only things that were worthwhile were the occasional, and I mean occasional, enemy watchtowers, but other than that, there's just nothing to the sailing once the novelty wears off beyond the scope, so it just becomes tedious and boring with or without the benefits of the HD remake. I think a good counterpoint would be Breath of the Wild, as it feels like this concept done right, whether or not you like that game as a game, because you're navigating a seamless open world pretty much on foot or horseback if you're stupid, but despite the desolate state of Hyrule in Breath of the Wild and the relative slowness of walking, it's a much more lively game world. It's much more well realized for a number of reasons, the biggest of which being there are actually things on the way to your destination. You have a bunch of different terrains that offer unique challenges, like, for example, there's something so inherently satisfying about climbing a mountain that sits between you and your destination. You can find enemy outposts to conquer, micro-dungeons, or even just animals or plants, or just looking at the scenery is nice. Certainly better than featureless blue ocean. The world feels ever-changing, and with the game being as open as it is, everything you do benefits your bottom line, so it encourages you to seek out watchtowers or mini-dungeons to help you on your quest. Hunting and foraging gets you food, and best of all, you can fast travel to all of the landmarks you've been to from the word go, meaning that you branch out from whence you came rather than forcing you to commute everywhere. It feels deliberately built to be open. Wind Waker, on the other hand, has nothing. Nothing to discover, nothing to do on your way, nothing. It feels like linearity trapped in the casings of non-linearity, because Wind Waker is essentially a linear game with all of these things having to be done in a specific order, so all it does is make it so you have to spend 7 to 10 minutes going to your next linear objective, turning sailing into nothing more than a commute. It feels like egregious padding. Again, I can see why people like this sailing, but personally, it got old for me quick.
One of the things that makes sailing a chore in the original was the never-ending need to pull out the Wind Waker, play the Wind's Requiem, watch the animation play, and then readjust the wind direction. In the Wind Waker HD, if you play a piece on the Wind Waker, you only have to watch the animations once per play session. Matthew Matosis put it best. This way, the effort that went into those animations aren't lost, but at the same time, the repetition is cut. The Swift Sail makes all the sailing drama improve, though. It makes me honestly enjoy traveling from place to place as I sit back on the sea. Whereas before, I just pointed the GameCube analog stick in the correct direction and went on Twitter. I really don't like the RNG involved in getting the Swift Sail auctioned to you, but at the same time, I'm not going to lose sleep over that because it's so worth it. Honestly, by the time I thought sailing was becoming a bit tedious, we had the bow and arrow and could then unlock the teleportation songs, which really makes it a complete non-issue for me.
I disagree, but that's fair to an extent. Going through in a regular playthrough, I didn't find the fast travel song until long after the sailing got old for me, and even then, you can't go just anywhere, so there's still an abundance of commuting you have to do.
As for the items we obtain throughout the game, we have many of the usuals, like the hook shot, the hammer, the boomerang, the iron boots, etc. But you also have some new and unique items, like the grappling hook, which is used to swing in various areas, and is sometimes used to unlock secret areas. In the original version of the Wind Waker, the grappling hook was kind of finicky, whereas you would latch onto a target, and then you'd have to stop in place in order if you wanted to turn around, whereas the Wind Waker HD just makes it like traditional swinging in video games. We also have the Deku Leaf, which is used as a parachute and can be used to propel yourself onto certain surfaces, as well as stun enemies. For the most part, the items are fun to use and are well implemented throughout the game. There's a good reward for completing dungeons, and it's fun to experiment with in the world to see what you can use them on, and find out what you can unlock with them.
You said it.
Now that the gameplay's covered, how are the dungeons in the Wind Waker? Well, the game has 5 main dungeons in it with a very consistent quality standard, for better or for worse. When thinking about it, the dungeons in Wind Waker really aren't about complex brain teasers, and like I've been saying since my review of A Link to the Past, I really don't mind it that way. The dungeons in Majora were all over the place in quality, and most of the time left me dying to see it end.
While I disagree with your assessment on Majora's Mask, I can definitely agree that in terms of dungeon structure, implementation, and design, Wind Waker is great. I've always said that when Wind Waker gets down and dirty as a proper Zelda game, it's superb. It's everything in between that I have a problem with. Starting with the Dragon Roost Cavern, I think it's a great dungeon. The puzzles all ride the line between brain scratching and overly simple, and the combat mechanics makes the combat sequences inherently satisfying, and the integration of the grappling hook was masterfully done.
We can clearly see how these dungeons are more about getting through the room at hand, like the few enemy rushes, and using the grappling hook to get through this room and so on. There are a bit too many instances of block pulling for my liking, but it is something I can live with. I like the puzzle where you have to use the fire slug as a way to press the switch to get the boss key. I also really like the atmosphere and lighting. It feels like a breath of fresh air when you finally get outside after all the caves and lava. The Forbidden Woods is an incredibly generic name for a dungeon that is ultimately alright. I enjoy using the new Deku Leaf, and I think it's really satisfying to use the boomerang with the added ability to cut wires and send them flying to the ground, but beyond that, it's standard Zelda fare.
Yeah, it really is a standard fare in terms of Zelda, like your Woodfall temples or your forest temples or your... Holy crap, is every forest-based dungeon the insert dungeon here type of thing? Well, there are some interesting mechanics like using the Deku Leaf to use gondolas and propel yourself in different directions, and the use of the Deku Nuts was pretty interesting, but yeah, other than that, it's a pretty standard dungeon, but it's still quite good for what it is, and especially gets better once you get the boomerang. After that, you have the Tower of the Gods, which is probably the low point in terms of dungeons in Wind Waker. It's still quite good, but it's a bit plodding with how you have to constantly rely on the cruising speed with the King of Red Lions to get from place to place, which is slow as hell, and taking control of these statues was a cool mechanic, but they also move too slow, and there was also too much back and forth. Overall, it's pretty fun, but it can be a chore sometimes.
It's worth noting that the Wii U version increases the cruising speed, which makes the opening half more doable. However, the content itself just feels a bit repetitive, as we have to go down the 3 paths, control the statues all 3 times, yada yada yada, which is not helped by the bland visuals. The Earth Temple really makes up for this by providing what I think is the best dungeon in the game, starting with the fantastic atmosphere. It just feels like the Icona Valley, only if it was a dungeon, with the eerie Redeads making a comeback. The atmospheric music as well really contributes to this. In this temple, we're aided by Medley, and I find working with her to navigate through this dungeon to be the most satisfying of all the dungeons to use the command melody, as the two of them have to work together to reflect lights all across the different rooms.
It's a very creative dungeon. It may seem like the concept of reflecting light, which is a mechanic oft used in Zelda games, would be mundane, but they take special care to make sure that it's creatively used and well implemented. Also, the usage of Medley for the puzzles added a fun dimension to the dungeon, whether you had to control her yourself or use her to get to an unreachable point. It was fun and creative. Legend of Zelda at its best.
The Wind Temple's right next to the Tower of the Gods at the bottom for me. This is my definition of a dungeon that's complimented for being the most complex. However, this has always been a hollow compliment in my eyes. For any dungeon, this really doesn't mean anything. Sure, this dungeon has the most layers, rooms, and puzzles, but I find it to be annoying to go through at times since you have to climb all the way up, and Bakar is not a character I enjoy controlling, and the music's kind of annoying. Although that's a bit nitpicky.
Yeah, there's a fine line between satisfyingly complex and overly complex, and I think the Wind Temple goes just far enough over that line that it's to its detriment. It's a good dungeon, perhaps great when you're going through and solving puzzles, and I appreciate the way it gradually opens up, but there are a few walls I hit where the only thing I could do was meander around trying to brute force the puzzles. Not to mention, the point in the middle which you had to use the Deku Leaf to climb to the top was made frustrating by the fact that the Deku Leaf uses magic power, and these environments didn't have many refills. So those are the dungeons. Overall, for the most part, they're really good and really get the Zelda feel down, with a good balance of combat, exploration, and puzzles, and benefited from all the strengths of the engine and had a lot of good design and fun moments.
Overall, my opinion on the dungeons aren't that different from yours. It's a quality set of dungeons, but not the best in the series.
Like I said, when this game gets down to it, it's a great Zelda game, easily one of the best. It had the bones of one of the best Zelda games of all time, if not the best, but there are 2 problems that tie into each other when it comes to Wind Waker that seriously harm it. It's terribly cut down and by proxy padded beyond belief. What's funny about Wind Waker is that you can practically see the cut marks of where they had to cut content, like the first 2 Sacred Pearls are obtained by doing 2 really good dungeons, then the third is given to you out of nowhere when you blow a hole in Outset Island. There was clearly supposed to be a dungeon here, but they cut it due to space or time constraints. It also hurt the progression of the game, like the sequence where you get the Wind Waker apropos of nothing. It feels like there was supposed to be a sequence that you acquire it in a climactic epic way, but it was cut, and so they had to give it to you when the plot demands it as opposed to something something that felt earned. There was no build or payoff, and that accounts for many of the developments in the game. What they did build up was actually really good, but there were some things that should have felt big but just didn't. Speaking of, this is also the reason why I outright forgot I had the Deku Leaf at one point, because it was practically forgotten for about half the game, and also it blends into the item menu, but never mind, as if there was supposed to be another section of the game used to flesh it out. And here's another example of content being cut down: the Triforce Hunt. Oh dear lord, what in the fuck were they thinking? It was obvious that there was supposed to be something here in place of what became the Triforce Hunt that included some form of dungeons, but they were cut, and now we have to deal with a 4-hour glorified scavenger hunt. If you enjoyed this, more power to you, but Jesus, I almost packed it in right here because it was such a boring waste of time filled with too much commuting and way too much busy work. So much of the game seemed cut down to accommodate some sort of restraint that was put on the developers, and it really harms the game overall.
I mean, if you say so. I, for one, found this part to be one of my favorites in the game. Before I say anything, first it's important to note how the things that make the GameCube version as tedious as it is would be tingle. You have to find the 8 charts for the Triforce and translate them all, with a few that exceed the default wallet. Now, in the HD version, only 3 charts exist, and the other chart locations are replaced by the Triforce parts themselves. Honestly, I managed to get my hands on 2 whole Triforce pieces before even getting to the Wind Temple. That was just me messing around in the sea and nothing more. The quests themselves are fun to do. I love the game's combat, so of course I love the parts where you do just that, and who wouldn't love playing through the basement of the Joy Pendant Lady's private island? It just has the right atmosphere that I can get into. The only objectionable part to this Triforce Hunt in the Wii U version would be how the ghost ship can appear throughout the game, but you cannot go into it until you have the chart. However, I do think it was cool that you had to read the chart and see what shape the moon was in order to follow it. Very unique stuff. With all that said, I love the Triforce Hunt, and I have ever since my second playthrough. Ironically, on my first run, I said it was bad because everyone else did. That was also why I liked Majora. It's always fun to think for yourselves, kids. Even though the Wind Waker was obviously rushed, I still had fun with all the content that was there. It was substantial and polished enough to be fun.
Seriously, the Wii U version is by far and away the definitive version, but either way, the Triforce Hunt is just this wall of nothing where you have to go all over the map trying to find these items, like having 2 courses of a 3-course meal before having to eat a pile of sand to get the 3rd course. You may have had to know to go to the races in Majora's Mask before you were able to access Ikana Canyon, but here you have 8 equally arbitrary tasks before you can get the opportunity to get a Triforce shard. Then the constant need to get more money because Tingle's an expensive bitch was ridiculous. Without wishing to beat a dead horse though, pretty much every Triforce map has the issue of being cryptic. Just getting the one in the Bachelor Pad is something like a 10-step process, and if you don't know how to get to the secret underground maze, you'd be shit out of luck. Or how about the Savage Labyrinth, where you have to go through 30 rooms just to get a Triforce chart? I mean, at least in HD they have the courtesy to put the Triforce shard down here, but 30 rooms? That's like 20 minutes of just doing the same thing over and over. Combat's fun, yeah, but 20 minutes? And in GameCube, all of that repetition still amounts to you having to go out and find the Triforce shard, and if you really want to go for it, if you go for 50 rooms, you get a piece of heart. No, thank you. I think a big indicator of cut content was that there are only 5 dungeons, way less than the series average, and it shows. There are so many points where the game goes on for ages without anything interesting happening. The first time I played this game, the Triforce Hunt took me a day, and this time it only took me 3.5 hours, but that was 3.5 hours of just bored nothing. Then we come to the issue of padding. The Triforce Hunt plays into both these problems, being too padded and cut down, and it's probably the best example. The padding is what almost kills it for me. Just the intro is terrible. I don't mind long intros if we're actually doing things that benefit the overall mission, but after our sister gets captured, we go to the Forsaken Fortress and epically fail, and believe me, we'll get back to the Forsaken Fortress and the aneurysms thereof in a bit. All it amounts to is seeing Ganon for the first time, then getting a sail which didn't add anything to the experience. You free Tingle for later. Then once you get to Dragon Roost Island, you still have to do a bunch of busy work before you actually get to the first dungeon. This intro is the first red flag, especially for the fact that on my first 2 playthroughs, it took over 3 hours just to get to this point.
What are you talking about? By that time, I was almost on the 3rd dungeon. What game are you playing?
That's why I said first 2. On my 3rd playthrough, I knew what I was doing and got through it at roughly the same pace as you, but it's a first-timer's trap. It's one of my least favorite intros in the series because of how long it takes and how none of it really means anything for the quest, the world, or or you. In Ocarina of Time, it takes you 15 minutes before the plot setup and you're in the action. Twilight Princess was notoriously slow, but it spent its time building the world and relationships. While there is some of this in Wind Waker with your grandmother and whatnot, and what's there is really good, but too much of the intro means nothing. I'm fine with slow moments if they're earned, but this game is so slow and plodding with unimportant claptrap right out of the gate. Granted, I'll concede that this was mostly my fault.
I really don't see the issue, especially in regards to Wind Waker having a quote-unquote beginner's trap. A beginner's trap would having to be go getting a powder keg because of the fact you'd have no idea you needed it in Icona. In the Wind Waker, you're told where to go, when to do it, and so on. The Forsaken Fortress is so simple in level design, and Windfall Island is all about buying the sail, and then you're told to free Tingle. Simple, plain, easy to understand and do.
Well, yeah, buy the sail, but from who, or what, or how? It's certainly something I missed, so either I'm dense as a brick or some things aren't communicated well, but that wasn't my point. My point was that none of it really amounted to anything aside from like 5 minutes worth of stuff. Until you get to Dragon Roost Island, it's all inconsequential, it's all pointless, and there's so many points that this game feels padded and if cut wouldn't take anything away, while paradoxically cutting things that were clearly more interesting than what was there. Like, there was this one point that I can't help but say, what were they thinking? The sequences where you meet up with Medley and Makar are really sweet sequences that build into their dungeons perfectly, but what do you need to do to get to said dungeons? You need to stumble upon Cyclos and use the bow to shoot, whereby he'll give you the Ballad of Gales. Then you need to know to travel to this specific fairy fountain, which can only be accessed this way. Then you get the fire and ice arrows. Then you need to know that you have to go to these random islands in the middle of the ocean and use either the fire or the ice arrow respectively to get inside the island and find the item that lets you get to one of these two dungeons. That's way too much busy work to get into these areas. Also, how are you supposed to know any of this? Majora's Mask has some obscure shit, but in my opinion, this blows anything Majora's Mask did out of the water and halfway up the beach, at least on the critical path.
I really can't say I agree with any of this either. Starting with Cyclos, you can first attack him after the Tower of the Gods, so by the point of the Earth Temple, it's almost a guarantee that you will have seen him. Getting to the Fairy Fountain is also right next to the Forsaken Fortress on the map, the current destination you will have been going to after the Tower of the Gods. The fire and ice arrows challenges are not very far away in distance from the dungeon entrances, so I can't see where the problem lies there either. I really don't think Wind Waker of all games is this cryptic, impossible to navigate game.
Well, yeah, it's on me, but that's just how it went. It's not even that it's cryptic, it's more so how roundabout and obtuse it is for something so basic. Besides, having thought about it, I'm not sure if it was just me, but everything you just described there did not happen to me. I had to actively go out of my way to find Cyclos. I had to actively go out of my way and look up a walkthrough to get to the fire and ice islands, so I don't know what happened. The cut content is probably why they had to fill so much of this game with sailing, padding out the content ridiculously. I could go over every Triforce piece and every obtuse puzzle and every bit of egregious padding, but we'd just be splitting hairs at that point.
As if you haven't done enough of that already.
Objection!
On what grounds?
The defense is a dick.
And I thought I was the one being defensive.
One part that was just terrible, for me at least, was relatively unchanged in either version. Let me ask you something, Jay. What is the worst part in every Zelda game?
The obligatory forced stealth section?
Exactly, but at least in most forced stealth sections there's a workaround, like having the ability to knock out guards. Here it's the case that you're launched into the Forsaken Fortress without any weapons. I almost called it the Forbidden Fortress. That's a mistake I've been making a lot lately. Don't be surprised if I make that mistake by the end of the review. This was agony. How many times did I think I was getting somewhere only to be caught by a guard who I couldn't see, or I tried to sneak past a guard I thought I was out of range of only for them to see me? And you know how in most good games with stealth attributes you have a chance to run away if caught? Not here. The moment you get seen, you freeze in place like the sight of these guards turns Link to stone, though given how ugly they are, that could be the case, and you get thrown back into your cell without any chance to do anything. It's the worst kind of stealth. Listen, I understand that this section is easy and over quickly if you know what to do. I understand that there are things you can do to take the edge off, but that's every forced stealth section in the series. But the reason why this is, in my estimation, the worst stealth section in the series, and the reason why the intro to this game is such a pain in my ass, is because of how easy it is to have to start from scratch, and the fact that there's no way to defend yourself or even run away. Ocarina of Time, you can knock the bitches out. Majora's Mask, Stone Mask. Here, you're given nothing. Perhaps I'm just thick and couldn't find my way and kept getting caught. Maybe it's all on me, but I still found this section pure agony, and it's agonizing no matter how many times I play this game.
I find your use of the phrase workaround to be funny. In Ocarina, there were just plainly no workarounds for a terrible camera, which leaves you liable to get caught over and over and over again. Same thing in Majora, except a cheat. Stone Mask makes the section completely worthless. In addition to the awful backtracking for the damn Zora eggs. When I replayed this section, I was surprised just how much I did enjoy it. The camera's far better than the previous games, and you only ever have to sneak past 2 guards at a time that are easy to keep your eyes on. When you get into the hallways, sit tight in the barrel for a few moments and it's done. I did take longer in my GameCube run where I've forgotten the layout, however the level design with the Forsaken Fortress is so laid back and easy to navigate, so therefore getting through it should be a complete non-issue for anyone who's proficient in 3D Zelda gameplay. I mean seriously, after you take out 2 of the security towers, since you don't have to take out all 3, go through the door and it's a straight line to the end with minimal flashlight guard encounters. You say this part isn't improved in the Wii U version, well I say it didn't need to be changed because it was perfectly fine to begin with. You feel so powerless against these enemies here, which makes the epic comeback all the more satisfying as you rip your previous aggressors to shreds.
Well, yeah, that I can dig, but did it have to come with the asterisk of having no defensive capabilities whatsoever and not being able to run away? Anyway, moving on.
Beyond that, we have the bosses, and as far as bosses go, we have a fairly good lineup for a Zelda game. First of all, we have Goma. For this, you need to use your grappling hook to latch onto the tail of Valu, bringing down the roof on top of Goma, gradually destroying its armor, after which it's just a matter of attacking its eye before you defeat it. A common theme with Wind Waker's bosses are how cliché they are. Get dungeon item, use it on boss fight, boss dies in a minute or so. That doesn't mean the gameplay is bad, but it's just lacking in surprise. Although using the grappling hook is a lot of fun in the fight.
Goma's a staple of the Zelda series, and off the top of my head, this is probably my favorite fight from it. The mechanics of having to bring the roof down on top of Goma to damage it was really creative and enjoyable.
Following that, we have Kale Demos in the Forbidden Woods. You have to use the boomerang to cut down the tentacles holding it up, then it falls to the ground revealing its weak spot, giving you a chance to run in and attack it. I think this boss fight is the single greatest example of cliches. The colors going off everywhere are cool, but I can't help but feel like the boss is lacking, since you've been cutting down wires for the entire dungeon.
I think this one's okay. I like the idea, but the execution leaves a bit to be desired, like how it's a bit ambiguous how much time you have to attack the weak spot before you're eaten, but it's a fine enough boss.
After that, we have Godon the Great Arbiter. This is a style of boss that's almost obligatory in these games where you have to shoot the hands, then its eyes, and that's all you really need to know. I like this boss quite a bit. Once again, the lighting and atmosphere are amazing, how it takes advantage of the bombs and arrows at once.
Personally, I'm not a fan of how often they need to bring out the shoot the hands boss, but it's a fine enough boss fight on its own. However, it's very self-explanatory, so there's really nothing to say. Still, I prefer Bongo Bongo Bongo, I don't want to leave the Congo, no.
But Bongo Bongo didn't focus the camera on him though. Not to mention how you could probably kill him in one phase.
There's also Phantom Ganon after this, but it plays like a greatest hits showcase from Ocarina of Time, where you need to play tennis with the bugger.
Even though Ocarina got that from like the past, but it's neither here nor there.
Shut up. But it's a good time, and always satisfying to catch him off guard.
Facts. The real boss fight of this area is the bird that's been giving you so much trouble up to that point, the Helmerak King. First you need to make it through this tense chase up the tower as it's filling up with water, and after that you fight him on the roof.
Wait, this is the top of the fortress. How are they filling it up with water?
He has multiple attacks, but the one you need to worry about is when he smashes his beak into the ground, because that's when you can smash his mask with a hammer. Basically, this strategy is repeated, but it gets gradually harder until the bird dies. This boss is so much fun to fight as I ripped him to shreds after all the damage he's caused.
Yeah, for as simple as this boss fight is, I like the way it organically escalates, plus the addition of putting that bird in its place is great fun. This is kind of like the end of the second act, and it's fantastic.
Then we have Jahalhala. For this one, you need to use the mirror shield to shine light on him, which makes him materialize. Then you throw him into one of the spiked walls, splitting him into a bunch of Poes. You defeat all the Poes to win. The Poes can only have a certain number destroyed in each phase, and that just makes the boss feel pretty clunky.
Yeah, I find this boss pretty annoying. It's kind of the bullet hell equivalent of a boss fight, and it just comes across as finicky.
Then the last boss for Ganon's Tower, Mulgara. Here you're trapped in a pit of quicksand and need to hookshot these creatures' tongue before you can damage it. From there it's pretty straightforward. Just repeat that step while at times dealing with Mulgara's larva and you win. One of my favorite things to do was taking a selfie in the Wind Waker HD right as he was about to eat me. It's damage that's so worth taking.
This is another good one. While being a bit one note, that one note is so good that it doesn't really matter. The sand all around you, the constant lack of awareness of where your foe lies, the minions attacking you, it creates the perfect environment for a boss fight, and the boss fight itself is fairly challenging and gratifying to beat. After that, I guess all that's left is the ending.
I suppose beyond that, given your dislike of this game, you probably don't like the ending either.
Actually, that's not true. In terms of execution, this is one of my favorite endings in the series. I have my issues, absolutely, and I don't think it reaches quite the level that Ocarina of Time reached, but it's definitely the highlight of the game for me, which I really respect. While I feel they didn't execute the intro very well, the ending is where they really went all out, and I think they nailed it. Mostly.
Interesting, so I guess we can stop disagreeing for once.
Fusion Hub!
Shut up. Once you get back to Hyrule Castle with the Master Sword fully restored, you find out that Zelda was captured by Ganon in the meantime, and now aside from finding and beating Ganondorf, you have to save Zelda. In other news, the sky is blue, water is wet, and Kevin Monroe's a hack.
Who?
Exactly. Once you make it through Hyrule Castle, you reach the barrier that was blocking you earlier. And now you're able to destroy it and proceed to Ganon's Tower, which is about a 5-minute walk from Hyrule Castle for some reason. Once you're inside, you go through a Mega Man style boss rush where you have to fight Mulgara, Jalhala, Kayla, Demos, and Goma again. They're defeated in the same way they were defeated before, so nothing changes there. And there's also a black and white, or maybe slightly sepia tone, filter implying that none of this is real, and it's just a test for Link to prove his worth. You all might know my disdain for boss rushes that involve nothing but repeating content. Sorry, I mean testing you 90s gamers and how much you learned. Sorry, my bad.
Of course, you have the puzzle platforming section that leads into each boss, so it's not a straight boss rush, and adds a nice variance to each boss fight and the lead-in thereof. From there, you make your way to the next area, and this section of puzzles legitimately stumped me for a while, and it was a fantastic aha moment when I realized the connection of the candles in each room. Those are the puzzles I like, the ones that actually take thought, but where I feel like an idiot for not seeing it. Not the type of puzzles you'd literally have no way of knowing unless you have a walkthrough. Speaking of, from there you fight Phantom Ganon again. This time he's a bit harder, but the idea is the same, except for my first issue with this section. The game fails to mention, as far as I know, that the direction his sword falls in is where you have to go. This is another thing you'd have no way of knowing. When I first played this, I thought I'd hit a glitch, or it was random or something until I looked it up. That's not an aha moment, that's a how the fuck was I supposed to know that kind of moment.
Personally, I find this to be an example of poor judgment. I mean, if you keep going into random rooms, and the sword continues to point in the direction you should be going with its ever so precise fall, I think you should have been paying more attention.
But it's not really something you're thinking about at the time. You could infer it, but there could also hypothetically be any number of variables, is me point. From there you get the light arrow and head off to the next area where you fight Puppet Ganon. Now, are we both in agreement that this is the best boss fight in the game?
I'd say it's up there. It does last for quite a long time, and frequently changes it up with it starting as you cutting the wires of the boomerang. However, the wires are much sturdier than what we're used to. In any case, you need to break the red wire holding the Puppet Ganon up, and to release his weak spot you can attack him with your sword, but you can also aim for the other wires, which makes it so he can't move certain body parts, which stops certain attacks. I especially love the part where it's hovering above you and you use the reflection to dodge and use the light arrows to stop it.
I love the creativity on display here. It's such a clever idea of having the various attacks be based around the strings, and I really appreciated the fact that the primary rope was a different color to the rest so it didn't get confusing. The same goes for the second stage, only now you have to be much more meticulous with your placements, but also have to be much more aware of your surroundings lest you get blindsided. It's a fantastic boss fight, and from there you climb the chamber with your grappling hook to the final boss area outside. Ganon exposits about his homelands and the winds that bring death, yada yada yada, and then you fight.
This is probably my favorite moment in Zelda history. Ganon comes off as upset that he lost all he was once fighting for to the gods. He believes everyone else should be as well, since the gods just destroyed homes and lives to flood the world. He really doesn't care about this Link or Zelda that much, he just wants the Triforce so we can have his land and Gerudo people back. However, the king ruins this and wishes for Hyrule to finally be destroyed. This is when Ganon goes completely ballistic and decides that for revenge he's going to kill Link and Zelda once and for all. The boss fight itself is... wow. I don't know how to describe it. The atmosphere is even stronger than Ocarina as the world around us is literally dying, as Link and Zelda actually work together this time instead of for just being a cheerleader like an Ocarina who helps for one text box, with the accompanying music being one of my favorites in gaming history. The boss fight is a bit easy though. I mean, Ganon does a lot of damage, so it's best to be on your toes, with a cool detail being that Ganon gradually adapts to your parry moves, and he's the only one in the game to do so.
You hit the nail right on the head for the most part, except this is my second issue with this section. It's paradoxically a climactic anticlimax. The setting is right, the atmosphere is right, the soundtrack's perfect, and the boss fight was almost right. But then it feels like it's building to this big epic third stage blow-off like Ocarina of Time was, then boop, over. What was that? It almost mirrors the Majora's Mask final boss, but for different reasons. There it just felt samey because 3 of the 4 stages were the same, and here it's just too short. 2 stages for a final boss, neither of which are particularly long enough to feel like half of a boss fight, so it just feels like it's way too short. Everything builds perfectly up to the ending, and it just ends about 3 minutes earlier than it should. Don't get me wrong, I really like this boss fight, but it was so close to being perfect, and it got everything right except for the boss fight itself. This had all the potential in the world to be one of my favorite boss fights of all time, but it got so close and just messed up on that one little thing that doesn't necessarily ruin it, not even close, but definitely takes a chunk out for me.
I don't know what you mean there. Everything in Wind Waker's climax was so well done that I had no need for a third phase. Not to mention the fact that Ocarina's final boss was in 2 phases, unless you're counting the Tower Destruction as a phase, in which case I must disagree since that isn't a boss fight.
Well, I do consider that part of the fight. It's an epic escape scene leading to a red herring thinking you're safe before the epic reveal of Ganon. It helps build up suspense and make the final stage more epic, and aside from that, in Wind Waker it's just too easy. Here I just think the fight ends too quickly, leading to a bit of an anticlimax.
I really couldn't raise more objections to that if I tried. Saying that this crumbling Ganon's tower is a phase of the boss fight just doesn't work for me. It's not even a good section of gameplay, as you have to watch Zelda raise the same bars over and over and over again, fight the same enemies we've beaten effortlessly for hours. Not to mention how that's the checkpoint of the final boss for some reason.
Yeah, that was pretty dumb.
You say it builds suspense, let me say this. The first phase of Wind Waker's final boss is Puppet Ganon, the second phase is to climb up the tower, since I personally was on the edge of my seat as I did that in my first playthrough, and then the final phase is the sword fight. By your logic, my statement is perfectly valid.
And you know what? That's a perfectly valid statement, but I still think the Wind Waker fight with Ganondorf just ends too quickly, you know, setup and payoff. It was perfectly built up, but the payoff left something to be desired. They built it up so perfectly, but I couldn't help but feel blue-balled in the end. Besides, even then, Puppet Ganon and the climb aren't part of the boss fight by virtue of the fact that the Ganondorf boss fight starts after it, whereas the tower collapsing connected the first and second part of the boss fight, so to say it's not part of the boss fight would be a bit ridiculous in my opinion, and even then, the tower collapsing, even for as easy as it was, really added to the boss fight. That said, for all the shit I've talked about this game, I think the actual ending might be the greatest ending in the history of Legend of Zelda. Ganondorf has a sword shoved hilt deep into his forehead, turning him to stone. The King of Red Lions uses his magic to preserve the life of Link and Zelda, leaving himself to perish in Hyrule as the entire land, the last remnants of an age gone by, is submerged in the ocean, never to be recovered.
I mean, that one moment where Link reaches out in vain to try and save the king as he floats to the surface is just heartbreaking. I really did feel a connection to the King of Red Lions that I didn't feel with Navi or Tal. I couldn't explain why, but all of the goodbyes to a Zelda companion, this one got me the most as Link flies away.
I think it had to do with the presentation and how heroic the sacrifice was. Honestly, this could have been a good ending for not only this timeline, but the series as a whole. Hyrule is gone, lost to time at the bottom of the sea, and even Zelda's reverted back to her Tetra outfit when they reappear. All remnants of the past are gone, and everything we've ever fought for in previous Zelda games is destroyed. It's essentially the climax of the entire series. Everything we've done, everything we've ever saved, built to this.
Facts. This is the perfect ending, and the last shot kind of seems like a sci-fi The Adventure Continues sort of ending with the heroes going off into the unknown. With all plot threads tied up, they sail into whatever adventure awaits them. They'd never outright end The Legend of Zelda, but if they ever were, this would have been the perfect ending. But also, I do think it was a bit of a bad idea to continue the Wind Waker continuity from here because, well, this was the climax. Nothing's topping this. You see, in the end, stories should feel satisfyingly conclusive. Key phrase there is in the end. A story should end with its trump card being played, and once it's done, that should be it. Could you imagine if Darth Vader's redemption and the death of the Emperor took place in A New Hope, and then the next two movies were just Luke on Tatooine working on the farm? That would be pointless.
Exactly, but the destruction of Hyrule was the climax of this story, and yet we have two games that take place after this game that can't help but feel weak and small scale in comparison, retroactively tainting them. Have you ever played either of those games?
If I'm being honest, I don't honestly know much about the DS games, to be honest.
Well, they're not too good. Spirit Tracks didn't impress me much, and Phantom Hour ass might just be my least favorite Zelda game overall. Again, not bad, but very flawed for many reasons, but the baseline being the fact that they had to follow up on such a conclusive ending, but also because they doubled down on the backtracking and forced stealth. God, this court setting's boring. I feel like I've been standing in front of a green screen all day.
So that was Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. What'd you think?
Well, my opinion is fairly unchanged. It's one of those situations where I can see it's a good game, I can see why people like it, it has a tremendous upside, and when it gets going, it's one of the best Zelda games in the series, but it takes too long to get there, and it tries to fill too large of a space without enough substance, leading to some baffling design decisions like the Triforce Hunt. It's clearly a game that was heavily cut down. The beginning sucks, the middle's a mixed bag, and it ends itself on a really high note, and I appreciate that in spite of being cut down, they didn't skip out on the ending, but by that point it was too little too late. I've said before that if a game has to be rushed, make the beginning first, ending second, then everything in between, because the first and the last impressions are the most important part of the game, and if the game sticks the landing, it can make up for a lot of flaws. But that only extends so far. When I can actively see where they cut content, when I can actively feel the padding, then that's not a good thing. Having played this almost immediately after Ocarina of Time sold me on the series, and finding out that this was what people were building up, I can't help but feel simply disappointed. Its ultimate damning flaw was that I just found it boring a lot of the time. I like this game overall, but it was trying its damnedest to make sure I didn't, and I don't think I'm ever gonna want to play this game ever again.
I thoroughly enjoyed The Wind Waker myself. I mean, if you're going from the beginning to the end, I really can't think of a single part where I want to put the controller down, whether it be the intro, the dungeons, the Triforce Hunt, the amazing climax. I could just not put the controller down since The Wind Waker was such fun to play from start to finish. Things like the Triforce Hunt exist because of cut content, but since I enjoyed playing it so much, how can I complain? This and another title I may review another day have really stepped up to the plate as the definitive Zelda experiences for me. Great stories, fantastic mechanics, soundtracks, and graphics, what more could I want? If you've yet to play the game, Be sure to check out the Wii U version for the vast amount of improvements it adds. But beyond that, there's really not much else I can add.
Yep, that's pretty much it.
What's funny to me is that our opinions kind of mirror each other when it comes to the Majora's Mask and Wind Waker.
Yeah, we each have problems with our respective games, in your case Majora's Mask and in my case Wind Waker, that the other can look past and enjoy or not be bothered by regardless.
Yeah, I mean, The Legend of Zelda is such a diverse series, such a diverse fan base, that theoretically any game can be considered the best or the worst.
You know, I think things like this really goes to show you that nobody's wrong in cases like this.
Can we please stop the circle jerk in my courtroom, you fucking homo?
Whoa, buddy, that's unacceptable.
I don't know what that was about. I, the Honorable Judge Silly Eyes, finds the defendant, The Legend of Zelda, The Wind Waker.
Holy fuck!
Oh my god.
Look! Somebody planted a bomb under his chair! Quick! Submit that chair to forensics! It needs to be analyzed!
What do you say we, turn it over to the jury?
Good idea. So, viewers at home, let us know who you think won this little debate, while we scrape cream of judge off the ceiling.
Yum.
I'm still alive.